Hey guys, Mr. Roper here, and today we're going to be starting the next section of our selection tools projects for Adobe Photoshop. In this project, we're going to be using all the tools that you learned last week for selecting and cutting out objects, but we're also going to add in some challenges for you to stack those objects up in a certain order using the layers palette in Photoshop to create a realistic scene involving a hamburger. As you can see here, I've given you guys a link to a folder that contains all of these different pieces of a hamburger as separate individual photos. Now, some of these photos are JPEGs, some of them are PNGs. They both are made up of pixels, which we looked at in our first week, so we should have no problem cutting them out, selecting them, and reassembling them. The first thing you want to do when you follow the link to the hamburger folder is you're going to need to download all of these images. And you can do that just by right-clicking them and choosing download. And you'll see them drop down into your downloads folder at the bottom of Chrome. Make sure that you're doing this from inside the CAD server so that all of your images are being downloaded to that computer, because otherwise you won't be able to open them in Photoshop. So I've already done this ahead of time. I'm going to jump over into Photoshop now. Just make sure you go through one by one and download all of the images to start. All right, so now inside Photoshop, we're going to start to assemble these together. And the first image we need to open up is the image of the restaurant table. So I'm going to go to File, Open, and I'm going to navigate to my Downloads folder. And I'm going to look for all those images that I've downloaded. And I'm going to start with the empty table photo. Now, when I open this image up, we can use some of our keyboard shortcuts to zoom in, zoom out, or Control-0 to go full screen. And you'll notice it's a pretty good size photo. It gives us a nice empty area to work with. Next up, we're going to bring in our plate. So I'm going to go over to File, Open, and I'm going to select the empty plate image. And you'll see that it opens up in a new tab. And again, you can zoom in on this image. If we zoom way in, you can see all those little white pixels that make it up. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and open up all my ingredients at this point. So I'll go to File, Open. I'm going to hold down Control on my keyboard and select 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 other ingredients, and then press Open. And all of those photos will open up along the top of my screen as individual tabs. Okay, so back to that plate image, we want to think about what would be the best selection tool for cutting this thing out. And the one that I have that's going to work really good, because this is an ellipse shape, is my marquee tool, but specifically the elliptical marquee tool. So I select the elliptical marquee, I put it on the edge of the plate, and I start dragging out. And if I hold down my space bar, I can move that selection that I just made over into place, okay? And I can try to get it exactly the same size as the other one. If you don't get it on the first try, it's no big deal. You can always deselect using Control-D, and you can just start pulling again, okay? So I've got it at about the same width as the other plate. Oops, let's go back a step there. And I can move it around here and try to select that plate as best as possible, okay? Now that's pretty close. I'm going to go ahead and take that selection. I'll move my photo out of the way, go to my layers palette, and I'm going to click this little icon down at the bottom for Add a Layer Mask. Okay, you can see that that's cut out my plate now, and it's added a mask to it. I can take my Move tool from my toolbar. I'm going to drag this guy up, hold it on the empty table, and let go. Boop. Drops my plate right into place. Now you'll notice that most of these images are going to be different sizes. That's typical when you're downloading them from a lot of different sources online. What we want to do is transform them to scale them down to a smaller size. We may also need to tilt them a little bit using our perspective tool. So I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, Scale, grab it from a corner, and if I hold down the Alt key while I do this, you'll notice that it shrinks towards the center. And that gives me a little bit more control over where the plate goes. Now I've transformed it down as far as its scale goes, but I think I also want to tilt this thing a little bit. So I'm gonna, while it's still got the bounding box around it, I'm gonna go to Edit, Transform, and I'm gonna look for this one called Perspective. And once you have Perspective selected, if you grab a corner and you pinch it in, you'll notice the plate's gonna tilt as if it's tilting towards or away from us. So I'm gonna just tilt this plate slightly so that it looks like it's on a little bit better angle with the rest of my table, okay? And that's looking pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and place it there, okay? Now let's start to bring in our other ingredients, and then once we get all the pieces in place, we can go in and add things like shadow underneath the plate to make it look really believable. So I'm gonna close this tab that had the plate on it because I'm done with that. Don't need to save it. And let's go to our hamburger bun, which looks like it's right here. There we go. Now this one's a little bit more tricky because we have two parts of the image that we need to select. So I'm not going to use the ellipse tool here. I'm going to actually switch to one that gives me a little bit more control, and that is the quick selection tool. Let me move myself out of the way here. Quick selection tool. If I hold down on the magic wand and I select this one right here, quick select, what this one lets me do is as I click and drag, you can see that it's grabbing onto anything that looks like it's a similar color. So it's automatically selecting right up to the edge of that hamburger bun, and that looks pretty good. So I'm actually going to make a mask of this one. We'll do click, make mask, and that's going to cut out everything except for what we had selected. I can drag this over and put it on my empty table, and I'm going to leave it, ooh, that's a big bun. I'm going to leave it floating up here for a second, but let's definitely shrink this down. Edit, transform, scale. If you need to, you can zoom out with Control minus, and let's shrink this guy down to a more reasonable size. Okay, let's just leave it floating there for a minute because I want to go back and get the other part of the bun. On this image, I'm going to go back to the original. So I'm going to look for the History tab, right? It's normally right here on this little floating palette. If you don't see it, you can always go to Window and then select History. And let's go back before we made the mask, one step, okay? Now I can take my selection tool and I'm gonna select the bottom part of the bun here. I'm moving very slowly because I wanna grab only the parts of the bread. Okay, I'll try to get a little bit of the shadow here. Even though it's not really necessary, we can add a shadow in later. And then I don't want this white space here. So I'm gonna press down Alt on my keyboard till I see that little minus sign appear. If Alt doesn't work on your keyboard, you can also change it right up here at the top of the screen. I can just hit minus selection. And then if I very, very slowly move through that space, it'll select it back to the edge of the hamburger bun. So do that a couple times until you get the selection the way you want it to. We're going to come over here, click Make Mask, boom, cut it out. Remove tool. We'll drop it in. Again, it's really large, so we want to scale that down. Edit, transform, scale, and shrink. Let's see if we can get it about the same width as the bun we had above. All right, fantastic. Now I want you to pay attention to something because as we add more layers, it's going to get a little confusing over here in our layers palette. I'm going to move this over so you guys can see here. Let's start to get in the habit of naming our layers, especially with these projects that are going to have lots and lots of layers to them. So this first one here, we're going to call plate. Layer 2, we're going to call top bun. And layer 3, we're going to call bottom bun. Okay, if you want to name the back one table, you can call that one table. Okay. I'm going to rearrange these a little bit because the top bun should be above the bottom bun. So if I just grab it by its name and move it up there, that changes the order around. Okay, now let's keep getting our other pieces. I'm going to go grab the patty now. There's our hamburger patty. And on this guy, let's try our quick selection tool again. I'm going to go to quick select. Actually, let's see if we can use select subject. This one's by itself. Let's see if it'll pick it up. I'll do select subject. And voila. Hey, it did a pretty good job. It got almost everything from the burger except for this little piece of plate down here. So let's come up to the top and choose add to selection. And we'll just very carefully mouse around to select that in. Go to our layers, make mask, and we'll bring our patty over to the table and resize it. Edit, transform, scale. Okay, again, you can use the size of the bun as kind of a guide here. That looks pretty good. Press enter to set the transformation, and then layer this, name this layer hamburger, and move it underneath that top bun. So you've got bottom bun, top bun, hamburger in between, looking pretty good. Now this is where you're going to have to kind of use your designer's eye. If this looks like it needs to be tilted a little bit, feel free to go to edit, transform, perspective, and you can always tilt it back or tilt it forward to get a more accurate perspective. Okay, it takes a little bit of fiddling around to get this looking just the way you want it to, but I'm going to drop that in and make sure it fits. Okay. So I'm going to pause the video for a minute and I'm going to bring in the other ingredients, and then we'll be right back and we'll see what we're going to do at the end. I've come to the lettuce stage of this project, and this is kind of an interesting one because the lettuce is on a bright white background. There's a couple different ways we could cut this out. We could use a quick selection tool, and I'll just show you how that one works. If I take quick select and I select around the lettuce, it does a pretty good job of grabbing it where the white hits the green. Where it's going to struggle a little bit is up here during the light parts of the lettuce. So let's go really slow. I'm going to creep out here to the end as close as I can get it. Oops, and you see that it grabbed way too much up here. So remember, once you've made a selection, you can always cut away from it if you need to. I'm going to switch over to my lasso tool, and I'm going to set my lasso to grab the subtract from the selection, to basically take away from what I've selected here. And that's that little icon at the top. You'll notice that my lasso has a minus sign next to it. And so now with just my mouse, I can freehand around the part that I want to keep, and it will get rid of that and take it back to the edge of the lettuce. So this looks pretty good. In fact, maybe I don't even want this stem. I'm just going to freehand and get rid of that stem right there. Okay, let's make a new mask. Cuts it out. Grab your move tool, bring it over to your burger, and of course, transform it down to a normal size. Okay, there we go. We'll creep that up, and again, if you want to tilt it, transform, perspective, grab one of those little handles and just pull it out here in the front a little bit. Okay. We need some tomatoes. I'm going to come over the tomatoes ones. And since this is such a bright image, red on this transparent background, I think I can probably do this with just select subject. So I'm going to grab my selection tool, letter W on your keyboard, select subject. I think Photoshop should find this one pretty easy. Oh yeah, right away, we're going to make mask. And we're going to move it onto our design. Gigantic tomatoes. Scale it down. Drop them into place. Okay. All right, it's time for that bacon. We're going to come over the bacon slice. Again, let's do some select subject here. We'll go to selection tool, select subject, see how good of a job it's going to do. Pretty great. We'll make mask. And then let's drag this guy up and onto the bacon. Now, on this level, I actually want you to make more than one piece of bacon. I don't know about you, but I'm a big bacon guy, so I want more than one slice here. So first thing I'm going to do is shrink this down and get it to fit on my burger. And let's go ahead and name our layers. So I've added a couple things here. I've got my lettuce down below. I've got my tomato. And I've got my bacon slice. But like I said, I want 2 slices here. So I'm going to duplicate this layer. I'm going to right click it and I'm going to choose duplicate layer to make an exact copy of that bacon right on top. And then I want to flip-flop it so that it crosses, because right now you can see it's kind of on top of itself and it looks too similar. So let's go like this. We're going to go edit, transform, flip horizontal, and that will make it face the opposite way, and we can make a little cross between our bacon there. That drops it in. Last thing we need, oh, I forgot the cheese. Let's go to the cheese slice. Now this one's on a plate, and we need to cut it out from the other slices. So we're going to have to pick a slightly different selection tool for this one. Let's just go with the polygon lasso tool. And I'm going to use it to click around the outside edges of this slice. Okay. Remember, this one works like connect the dots. So you just click, and every time you click, it connects a new dot. We're going to go around, 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 back to the beginning, back to the edges. Looks pretty good. And then we'll make our mask, and we'll grab that piece of cheese and move it to our hamburger. Shrink. Zoom out here. This thing's getting really big. That looks about right. Okay. And then we're going to name this layer cheese. And I don't know where you like to put your cheese in your burger stack here. Personally, I want it underneath the lettuce so that it melts on that burger. So I'm going to move this cheese slice all the way down in between the lettuce and the hamburger. And then when I put it into place, you'll notice that it's fitting right where it should be. Looks a little stiff. You need this thing to melt. So here's where we're going to pull in our special effect trick for this project. I'm going to go to the cheese layer. And before I melt it, I need to combine the mask and the image so that it's actually cut out. The way to do that is to right-click the mask and press this button right here, Apply Layer Mask. You'll notice that the mask goes away and the cheese is actually cut out. So now we're going to make it melt over the edges of this burger. I'm going to come and grab a tool from my toolbar called the smudge tool. You can see it right here, okay? And with the smudge tool, if I grab a normal paintbrush, so I want to make sure that I have just a normal soft brush here, make it a little bit smaller, and watch what I can do. I can push this cheese right over the edge, okay? Push this cheese and have it kind of melt over the edge of the burger. I'm going to try this again. Let me go back. I'm not really happy with how those turned out. Let's go back a few steps in my history. And I'm going to get a brush that's a little bit harder, I think. Edges were looking a little too fluffy there. Okay, now if we smudge it, there we go. Now we're getting some gloppy, melty cheese. And you notice that if I just smudge and push on these edges, I can make this cheese look like it's really running down the edge of the burger. I'm getting hungry. Okay. Be careful you don't smudge it too much. A little goes a long way with this tool. But now I've got my melty, yummy cheeseburger. Okay, now that everything's done, we're going to move that top bun layer down onto our stack, pop it right in place, zoom out here, and check out our handiwork. To add an extra layer of believability on this thing, let's create some shadows. I'm going to go to the plate layer here, And again, before I apply any effect, I want to add this mask. So I'm going to right click it and say apply layer mask. You can see that got rid of the mask. We're going to right click this layer and we're going to choose blending options. Now, blending options are all these fun special effects that you can add to a layer in Photoshop. We're going to learn a lot more about these in the future, but the one I want you to use today is called drop shadow. When I press drop shadow and click it right on the name, you can see it puts a thin little shadow underneath the plate. And from these controls, I can determine where I want that shadow to go. For example, if I move the angle straight up 90 degrees, you'll see that the shadow is coming right from above. I can change its distance with this slider right here. I can change its spread with this slider right here. And I can change its size with this final shadow or final slider right here. So by finding the right combination of distance, spread, and size, you can create a shadow underneath your plate, and you can control how dark it is using the opacity slider from the top. So kind of fine tune it a little bit here and hit OK. We're going to be doing that with each of the layers. So you'll have a shadow underneath the bun. You'll probably have some little shadows under the tomatoes and the lettuce and the bacon. So we'll just work our way up. And you can see that every time you apply a drop shadow, your layer gets this little thing on it that says FX that tells you that that shadow is activated. If you want to turn it off, you just turn the eye off and the shadow disappears. Okay. So for your last stage, you want to go through, add shadows to your layer. Once you get that all done, we're going to save this thing up and we'll turn it into our advertisement for this delicious hamburger. Okay. So we're going to work on that in class today. Follow along as you need to, and I'll wrap up with the second part of this video in just another day. Bye.